Welcome to the Thoughtful Software Podcast. Innovate and thrive with thoughtful software. This podcast is all about helping technology leaders simplify innovation, build emerging tech, and confidently fuel digital initiatives. Join Andrew Wolf and Fahad Shokat as they discuss how to navigate the ever-changing software landscape. Keep it simple, focus on people, and consistently deliver value.
All right, Andrew, let's talk about scope of work when it comes to building software. This is probably the most important thing that we run into, and often one of the biggest reasons why a lot of software projects fail. Here's what we're going to build. Let's put a plan together. Here's all the features. Put it in a contract and let's go. Mike Tyson has a very famous quote that I love, is that everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. And software is no different. It never goes to plan. Yet we still run into a lot of folks who want a fixed scope in the contract, and then they wonder why they're not seeing results. And it's no shock that $2 trillion was lost on just bad software in 2020. So today we're going to discuss a very important topic that I think we can expand on in future episodes on why kind of having that fixed scope and fixed features up front is a bad idea, and what technology leaders can do to set up their digital initiatives for success. So maybe, Andrew, share your experience into why fixed scope is a bad idea.
So I think everyone loves fixed things. They love to know the quantity and quality up front of what they're getting. It's very comforting when things are fixed. We know what they cost. We know what we're getting. However, that really only works in certain circumstances. So if we look at traditional engineering, mechanical, or even civil, right, knowing the quantity up front is critical for the long-term success of the product, because what you're building, say it's a bridge, that bridge has certain requirements, max load, all of that you have to take into account. But it's a bridge. It has one job, and the value it creates is constant and static. On the side of software, though, value changes over time, and it's much more dynamic. And so when you look at a software project, you want to look at value. We've talked about this before. The same feature that would have added lots of value, say, 6 months ago, when you signed the SOW, doesn't add the same value now. The other thing that's true, too, is as you're working on software, the scope of it changes, and the understanding of what you're building changes as well. And not adapting to that, not adapting to your learnings is a mistake. It means you're going to sub-optimize what you're building, and you shouldn't do that. So fixed scope, while comforting, I believe doesn't, lend itself to the dynamicism of software. I think you have to take a different approach to how you think about building digital value and how you plan your projects out.
Where did this originate, this idea? Because software is new, right? I can imagine in other types of consulting agreements or even say construction that you'd put out, here's the roadmap, here's the map, this is how you're going to build it. You have this opportunity in software to do something different, and everyone knows this, that a fixed scope isn't generally a good idea. Why don't we transition to more of this flexible model?
Because it goes against everything that business school teaches. To be honest, they tell you that you should have fixed costs, you should be able to do financial planning, and you should be able to do all that. And with regards to that, well, if you don't know what the scope is, you don't know what you're getting, you can't do the financial planning that you would typically do. And I think that the financial models people are used to, if I buy a car, I need to get my car, and if I know what I'm getting up front, I think it breaks the mental model of most people that have been in business for a long time. I think as well, it's risky, right? There's a lot of risk associated with not quite knowing what you're getting. And I don't think a lot of people trust outside vendors as much as they should. And because of that, they're less likely to just give you carte blanche ability. So this is like a blank check type statement of work. And so I think that when you look at all those dynamics combined, it's not hard to see why people aren't interested with this. And so in lieu of doing the risky blurry right thing, people choose the wrong, static, ultimately more risky thing of choosing to have fixed scope.
It's really interesting because I think we should also make this distinction that we're talking about primarily emerging technology or modern software. That is, if you think about machine learning or computer vision, that's just fundamentally is not even done in itself. The technology is still evolving, yet it's still in a contract. Put this in, tell us this is how you're exactly going to do it. When we all know that it's not possible to, think that far ahead because as the technology is evolving and we don't know how this technology is going to be applied within this application, what we're going to run into. Yet it's still, let's put this plan together. And I think maybe your thoughts on just fundamentally try to plan too far in advance. Think about more short term, like a month at a time or 6 months at a time.
I think there's two ways to think about this. In a trusted partnership, I think you absolutely can do a month fixed rate. This is what I expect and have expectations that way. I think that's a perfectly good way of doing it. In a project that's more risky, one that is less known, let's say an emerging technology project, I think you have to get rid of the entitlement funding there. And you have to do it in phases, right? Prove the concept, build the minimum viable product, just like a startup would, right? They go out, they raise their angel round, they raise their seed round, they raise their series A, B, C, D, and then eventually if they're successful, they maybe go public or get acquired by a SPAC, whatever. The end result though is because they have to continually prove themselves over time, it's a constant checkpoint of saying, did I deliver enough results? Did I prove this concept that it works and we can go to market? And I think those two models of a trusted relationship where there is a fixed amount every month and we're going to talk about what you're going to deliver that month, or the other way of doing the incremental funding of ideas, I think that's how you have to think about things because technology is incremental at its core. It really, you don't build Rome in a day. And so you have to be able to think about it in experiments. And what are we trying to prove with this tranche of funding? Am I trying to prove that the idea is even viable? Am I proving that the market is viable? Am I proving that the technology can be built? Or am I proving something else entirely? Can I roll this out? Is it scalable? When you think about it that way, there's not so much risk. Like you said, doing things 3 months at a time, 4 months at a time, or this incremental funding of ideas de-risks the whole process and allows the engineering team to really get the knowledge and get the insights and clarity needed to make these ideas successful over time, like it was meant to be. And it doesn't lock you into a 5-year, $200 million digital transformation that you're now committed to, regardless of whether it's working for you or not. And you shouldn't do that. Like you should never commit yourself to 5 years in the future. Think about it this way. At the beginning of 2020, everyone had their commitment. Everyone knew what they thought they were going to do that year. And then they got punched in the face by COVID. And if you look, tech spending has been elevated to an all-time high. They target, I think, 30% growth, but it's actually going to hit closer to 60%. So you're seeing a doubling of investment in technology because people realize how critical it was. But all the best laid plans blow up when faced with reality. Like you said, Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Everyone that talks about it, ultimately, I think what it comes down to is that thinking about things in experiments, de-risking it by not having entitlement funding, finding trusted partners, and ultimately thinking about it as a technology project and keeping it in that special category. Not every project has to be run this way. Although I believe, and I fundamentally believe, if you ran all your business ideas this way in a form of, okay, what can we prove with this amount of money? And you ran it as a form of experimentation and cycles of incremental knowledge gain, I believe most businesses would be better run as well.
Yeah, I think that's what you're highlighting is extremely important and interesting. It really goes into the mission that we're on at Skipless, and what you're describing is just for everyone to be more thoughtful about how they approach technology. And the way we talk to our clients and initiate conversations is almost in three different phases: discovery, then we have like short-term projects, experiments, MVPs, POCs. And then the third phase is like product development, continuous product delivery is what we call it. And it's almost, you have this continuous team that's building a product for the long run. And it's not necessarily a short-term engagement. And that is very flexible. We're going to adapt. We're going to move things around. But as you were speaking, it got me thinking, the reason I believe a lot of this happens and why we have a lot of, challenges in software is really in consulting in our business. People are consultants generally. Even some of these big companies are happy to take your $250 million and $2 billion entitlement funding and say, yeah, we'll do a digital transformation over 3 years, because they'll just say flat out, yeah, that's possible. When we all know it's not true. It's not financially prudent to say, hey, let's incrementally take this approach. Let's take all that money up front. And I think as an industry, that's what we're on the mission to change.
I think it's a bit more insidious than that too, if you ask me. One, I think most of these legacy businesses that need software that need to be converted, they don't necessarily understand software. They are their business they're in. They're a plane company or a retailer or an energy company or an entertainment company. Like, they don't understand the incremental way that software is done. And instead of saying, we're going to help you realize how to do it, they don't partner. They just say, oh yeah, we'll do it the way you're always used to do it. $1 billion investment here, or $2.5 million investment here. You look at the Accenture failure recently, the rollout application they built, I think it's the vaccine app, $44 million, and the application doesn't even work. Why? Because they got $44 million and they didn't have to deliver working software. They didn't have to prove anything out. They were going to get $44 million because that's what the contract said, with or without success on their project. And I think when you look at it that way, it was healthcare.com or healthcare.gov, right? The Obamacare website. It was an abject failure until the people they hired came in. They were Silicon Valley veterans who came in and really thought about how to do software, delivered in an incremental way, got rid of the 44 some odd contractors, and they delivered twice as much software in half the time. And I don't even think it's a rounding error on how much they spent compared to the original healthcare.gov. And that case study there tells you everything you need to know. When they took it down, they made it incremental. They de-risked it by thinking about this in incremental work. They changed the game. I don't think agility comes naturally to a lot of companies, right? Most companies are top-down organizations. But when you're working in something creative like software, that one person, a 10x engineer, can add $1 billion of value to the top line in an hour, you have to invert the structure. The CEO is no longer the top of the organization. They're the bottom of the organization. You get the least say in what gets built because you're just looking at the bottom line. Yeah, you're talking about sales, you're moving things around, but you need to invert the organization from a top-down command and control structure to one based on freedom, openness, transparency, and teams that have autonomy. And everyone knows this. I'm not saying anything anyone doesn't know. Actually doing it, though, actually gaining the competitive advantage that's needed in software by, inverting control, getting rid of management layers, creating these independent teams is incredibly difficult and goes against how organizations have been operating for 50, 60, 70 years even. And it's in the DNA of these organizations. And it's scary, honestly. But if you look at how most consulting firms are built, they're built in that top-down way. And that's why they fail at software as well. That's why Accenture didn't deliver working software, and they haven't probably in a long time, because you need these independent teams and you need a new structure. And they can't, they're going to risk their $30 billion line of business to optimize for their $2 billion line of business? No way. They're never going to do it. They're never going to leave the money on the table. And so they will continue to have these failures until they realize they have to reinvent their own structure to work in the modern way that's required.
Yeah, and I think it goes both ways as well. You have a lot of corporations who are really excited about, digital transformation, and they want to, also join in on, the latest buzzword. And just consulting companies feed into that to say, okay, yeah, we'll deliver you digital transformation. We'll do this for you. But it really requires, do you think it's maybe a change in mindset, or do we need to have more discipline? Because this is not going to change anytime soon. Hopefully we're successful in our mission and people do become more thoughtful, but what's one approach that some technology leaders can take to not fall into this trap?
I think it's a paradigm shift. It really is. I'm willing to use the word paradigm shift here because it is. For most companies, being successful at software means giving up the way you used to work. Being a manager is no longer boss privilege. It's servant leadership. Getting in there and starting projects shouldn't be about appropriating $2 million of funds. It should be about having funds set aside for small R&D efforts. It's about changing the way you budget, changing the way you lead, changing the way you manage. And that sounds like a lot, and it is, right? There's a reason that there's companies that can spend way more than Google or could at one point, or Microsoft. And yet, when it came down to it, they still couldn't compete with these companies. And the reason why is these cultures are built from the ground up to optimize for creative work. And when you have that kind of organization, when you really think about shifting the entire mindset towards that, then you can be successful. But it's incredibly difficult. Again, like I said, I picked on Accenture there. But if you're another company, a more traditional company, and let's say you're a retailer, how do you invert control? What's been working and making you billions for years is no longer working for you. And are you going to risk those billions of dollars? Are you going to tell your investors that you're going to risk billions of dollars to invert control and do what's needed to make software work? And that's where I think Skipless comes in, right? I don't pitch my company often on the podcast, but at the end of the day, we can partner with people and make software work for them without them having to invert this control, without having to build the culture that we've painstakingly built. They can't afford to do it, but we can because we're built from the ground up to be good at technology. That's what we've picked to be good at. And because of that, we have a huge competitive advantage over most of our larger competitors and our smaller competitors too. And in that way, we're very intentional with the structure of our company, with the structure of our teams to optimize for those results I'm talking about. Because again, I talk like you can just paradigm shift, but can you? Can a company go from a legacy company to a non-legacy company, a new modern company overnight? No. You can count on one hand the number of companies that have reinvented themselves, right, in the last 10 years. And their stories because they have. Domino's did it, T-Mobile did it, but these are companies I can name off the top of my head, which means that tens of thousands of other companies that have failed to do the exact same thing, I think are the better case study for most people.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think what you're describing, is a very difficult mindset to think about because Gordon Gekko once said, greed is good. And I don't think so. And it's really hard not to say, if you, give us this up front, we can deliver this to you, knowing that you don't know really. And so I think it's definitely an approach that we've tried to take and really try to transform how people think about technology, which definitely is not easy.
If you look at Silicon Valley, the one lesson no one ever talks about, and I think a lot of people there really get it, is that the currency of power is no longer power. It's love. How do I build something someone loves? How do I build the next great thing? How do I create a brand that people love? And I think Steve Jobs understood that better than everyone else. And I think that part of that DNA trickled down into the rest of Silicon Valley. And it's about building something people love. And if you understand that and you extrapolate to management, then it makes sense that you don't have to be powerful as a person. As long as people love you, they will follow you and do what is necessary. That's why the perks in Silicon Valley. That's why what seemingly outrageous acts of kindness from CEOs and everything, the equity, everything else. Because for them, it's not about this huge power structure. It's always been about the mission and doing something bigger than yourself. And these empathetic leaders, these people that are loved by the people that follow them, that's where it comes from. And they have a power that most traditional big ego CEOs don't get. and they will never understand it because they can't see past themselves. But that's a huge competitive advantage to have an organization where people love the place they work, they love the mission they're on, and they're being rewarded for being on that mission. It's like I said, you can't compete with it. You're going to lose every time. And in that, it's so important. Like the GameStop thing that happened last week. Feels like a century ago, but it was last week. And why did people do it? It was out of hate. Hate's a very strong motivator. People didn't buy the stock because they felt that they were going to make money. Some people did, but a lot of those people were doing it to stick it to Wall Street because they hate them so much that they're like, here, I'm going to tank this hedge fund. It became a mission that people love to be on, regardless of the fact that a lot of people have lost money and they're left holding the bag for the institutional investors that made tons of money off of a short squeeze. But at the same time, you look at it and it's a great mission. People will join, and that's where you have to go. You have to start with the mission and start with putting people first. When you do that, then you can be successful.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because if you look at a lot of the successful companies like Apple and Nike, they talk a lot about how do their products make their customers feel. How do they feel? Like when you're wearing a Nike shoe, you feel just go do it. You can do anything that you want. You're using Apple products. They want you to get out there, get moving, be active, create things. It's not necessarily about the bits and bytes or how you got there, but it's really that bigger vision. And maybe that's what we're coming up to, is that if you have this grand vision of what you want your company to be, where you want to go, you can't really map it out like in a playbook, like here's step 1, 2, 3, and 4, and just go build it. Because or for sure, that's one thing for sure, is it's going to take twists and turns. It's going to be ups and downs. But if you still hold that high vision, then, you will have success at the end of the day, knowing that you're trying to serve people for a purpose and build them something great.
Correct. And when we talk about fixed scope SOWs, you lose the aspect that software is ultimately a journey, right? The journey has to create value. Don't get me wrong, right? I'm not some fancy purist that thinks you should do software for the sake of software. The best software, in my opinion, is no software at all. I made my living off of it. I think if you look at the best technology, it doesn't even seem like it's there at all. It just fades into the background as you go about your day. That's the best technology we have. And that's true for anything, software or not. And so when we talk about fixed SOW, it's about focusing on the journey you're going on with the person you're building it for and who you're building it for. Again, it's about the reason thoughtful software is such a powerful premise in my mind is that it puts the people first. How are the people that are going to build this impacting the people that are going to use it? And it really ultimately makes the purity of that journey so important. Because now it's not about the technology or the frameworks or the how it's going to get deployed or any of that stuff. And it's all really interesting to me. But at the end of the day, how is this going to impact my people, the people building it, the people using it, the second and third order effects on the people around it? And when you start doing that, magic happens. You're talking to customers. People love what you're building. They use it more. It changes the dynamic of what you're building altogether. And when you have that, it's a pretty powerful concept, much more powerful than a scope that feels super comfortable, but ultimately will cause failure. And I think we have to get outside of our comfort zone, just like we do with our mindset on leadership or management, and get in the mindset of serving people with our software or our leadership or with our presence. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's really interesting because one thing what I love what you're saying is that it's a journey for sure. And when you go on a journey, there's no always one straight path to where you're trying to get to. And there may never actually be a destination, right? A lot of these great companies, there is no end game, right? They're in this for the long haul and they just want to continue to drive value. And that's what I love about what we do is we're a mission-driven company that's trying to help build better technology and bring thoughtful software to the world. And you don't see that very often. And I think a lot of folks get stuck in this idea that here's one way to do this. Our agile is going to be our solution. Let's make the entire company agile. or whatever's the next thing, data lakes, that's just going to solve all our problems. Here's a diet pill. Now I'm going to finally lose all this weight. It's that one thing, but it's the journey that really matters.
Everyone wants shortcuts, right? Everyone wants to be a fucking bodybuilder, but no one wants to lift no heavy ass weights. One of the best bodybuilders of all time said that. And it's true. It's just, you can put that on everything. Everyone wants to be a software developer, but no one wants to write no unit tests. Everybody wants to be these things, but they want to take the shortcut to get there. And there are no shortcuts in life. And on top of that, this is my life philosophy. I think the beauty is in the small things. Right? It's not in the large, grandiose things that we think it is. Those are the things you might remember, but the small things are what add character and color to life. And in the same way, software is about that. It's the small joys on the applications that we like. Like when I left click and it has the option I want, or I click on something and it behaves the way I expect it to. Those small things are what makes software transformative, not the big features that everyone thinks it is. Right? It's the small things. And certainly if you don't take the journey the right way, you'll miss out on the small things and you won't be able to maximize the benefit or the value or the happiness generated by your product. And in that way, we should talk about how you achieve a journey mindset rather than a fixed mindset. I think it's something we should talk about.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in a previous episode about delivering value, not features. And our biggest gripe with Agile is obviously that it's point theater. A lot of how many features have you delivered in this particular sprint loaded up. I don't see a lot of discussion in that community about value, people-based, mission-driven. How do you make that switch? First of all, is that true? Do you still hold that criticism? And what's like the maybe better way to approach agile development?
I absolutely do. Well, you can't achieve anything great 2 weeks at a time, right? I'll just take it out of software for a minute. If you get paid every 2 weeks and you don't save any of your money, you ain't becoming rich. You're living paycheck to paycheck. Congratulations, right? And most companies, metaphorically, in their software live paycheck to paycheck. And they live sprint to sprint, and that's all that matters is 2 weeks of increment and the stress leading up to that. There's no roadmap. There's no journey to it. And it becomes 30 points of whatever the fuck we put together, in 2 weeks. And that needs to change. I'm not saying you have to be some 5,000 IQ juggernaut thinking 5 years in advance. I don't think anyone should do that. Honestly, I don't know anyone that can think more than a year in advance and be accurate. I guess there are a few people, but in general, most forecasts are wrong because of black swan events or what have you. It's just hard to predict. We live in a pretty unstable world in general. And so Agile needs to change to be thinking about like waterfall planning isn't bad, right? Now, expecting waterfall to solve all your problems is stupid. Because again, you can't predict it, but sitting down and really thinking ahead and using that to guide you along the journey is super important, right? Patton, general in World War II for the United States, a legendary figure, he was famous for thinking of plans and realizing and editing those plans as he went. That's how he won so many battles. That's what made him so great, was him thinking in advance, but also not being so deluded in the thinking that he knew that it was going to work. He pivoted, he worked hard, but he thought ahead. And Agile says you don't have to think ahead. And I think that's bullshit. Anyone telling you don't have to think ahead is full of shit and should be dismissed on merit alone. You have to think ahead and you have to plan, but you also have to adjust the plan. You can't blindly follow it. And yes, you should focus on what's the most valuable thing we can do, and that is going to change. And so as long as you're sticking to a value-based mindset and a growth-based mindset for that matter, then your initial plan that you have will always follow the most valuable path. And that's it. If you can do that, you can do agile development. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. 2-week check-ins to make sure we're still delivering things, of looking at what we did to get better. There's so many premises in agile that are super important. I just don't think you should live paycheck to paycheck on your software development.
If you're a technology leader listening to this, what we're describing, do you think this is really hard for someone to adapt to? Because it sounds like a very different mindset from when we talk to folks. When we originally, if I can back up, like when we were talking to quite a few technology leaders in the early conversations, they get really excited about what we're doing. But then often they go back into their old habits. What are some of the things that you can recommend on how to think more about the journey, or even if you have things in flight, how to make better improvements about what we're discussing?
When we were talking to our CFO friend on a previous podcast, I think that a lot of CFOs don't think the way he does about innovation and how to budget for it and everything.
Yeah,
I think that Mahesh, I didn't want to name him again, but Mahesh. So he's got to pay for that name drop, by the way. Make sure he knows that. The side though, so when Mahesh talked about it, I think it's important to know that there's business factors that cause these things to come back down. I know you want to go month to month, but we can't do that. So you have to put a fixed amount in the SOW. And the scope isn't in there, and so we don't know what we're paying for. And the business functions push back on potentially innovative mindset that can move forward. I believe that to really change the practice of business, you have to change the hearts of the people that created the system itself, and they have to believe in this. And most people are afraid to believe in it, right? If you make a mistake that costs your company $2 million, you probably lose your job. And people don't want to lose their job, and so they fall back into conservative ways. They don't push back, and they don't try to change the hearts and the minds around them to level the organization up. But I think the best leaders, and we work with some of them, show by example, and they lead by example, and they have courage in the face of that and say, no, trust me. They put their careers on the line, and when it inevitably works out in their favor, they're handsomely rewarded for it because they know how important they are to the organization, and they're viewed as a thought leader. I think that you have a choice to make. Will you have the courage to do what's right and stand up for it, or will you fall back in the line when they push back? And I hate to say it, but there are a lot of uncourageous leaders out there that will not stand up to the status quo and try to change it. And as long as that happens and you're a technology leader, you're going to get subpar results. But if you have the courage, I don't know. I've seen outsized results caused by a small bit of courage. And that's all you really need to say, no, we have to do it this way. If not, then we don't have to do the project at all. And if you do that, kudos to you. That it takes a big person to do that.
Thanks for listening. You can always connect with us at skiplist.com.